Horcruxes. They are one of the most mysterious and fascinating parts of the Wizarding world. These magical dark objects are so complex, not only being able to keep a witch or wizard who made it alive, but also having powers and minds of their own. I found this topic so interesting that I decided to do another deep dive, which you guys seem to like. In this video, I'm diving into the books, further lore, and anything else I could find on Horcruxes, which is actually a considerable amount. I put a lot of work into this video, so if you like it, please consider liking the video and sharing it to help spread it around. This is something that I think every Harry Potter fan would find interesting, so I want as many Potterheads to see it as possible.
I, who have gone further than anybody along the path that leads to immortality. Something much more sinister had lived inside that book.
Preserving my 16-year-old self in its pages.
The part
I grow stronger.
of Voldemort, the reason he can look into Lord Voldemort's mind, lives inside him.
It'll be our little secret.
A Horcrux is an object in which a person has concealed part of their soul. By doing so, you are protected should you be attacked and your body destroyed. In other words, you cannot die.
There was once a man named Herpo the Foul who lived in ancient Greece. He was a very important figure in the Wizarding world, although he was on the opposite end of history than Merlin, Dumbledore, and Godric Gryffindor. Herpo revolutionized and pretty much created the dark arts. Following his miraculous discovery of breeding a basilisk, probably the darkest creature to ever live, Herpo moved on to his next challenge, immortality. It took him years in which he murdered too many people to count, having to do so for each experiment until he got it right. Murder is of course against nature, and in the Wizarding world, they call it the supreme act of evil. When you kill, your soul rips apart, and Herpo eventually learned to take advantage of that. He created a spell that was able to grab the half of his soul that split and place it into an object. By doing this would keep the maker of the Horcrux anchored to the living world, even if their body were to take fatal damage. It has to be a specific type of murder though to make this work. Only a true, deliberate, and conscious act of murder against another person without regret or remorse would suffice to rip your soul in the way you would need it to. Killing to protect yourself from attack, protecting another from attack, killing by accident, or carrying out a mercy kill would not suffice. The object in which this split soul goes into is a bit more complicated because it has to be prepared beforehand using all sorts of dark magic. The object could be just about anything, including a living being. We saw two examples of living beings becoming Horcruxes in the original series. One was the human boy named Harry Potter, and two was a woman named Nagini. She's interesting because she was originally a human, but due to a condition that made her a maledictus, she was forced to live in the form of a snake, and it was in that form that part of Voldemort's soul went inside of her. Using a living being for a Horcrux can be risky though, because there's the risk that it would run away and be destroyed on their own. Many people theorize that you could do something like turning a pebble into a Horcrux and dropping it in the middle of the ocean. While this is a possibility, most who make Horcruxes wish to make the objects things that have a little more meaning to them.
And they could be anything, said Harry. They could be old tin cans or, I don't know, empty potion bottles. You are thinking of portkeys, Harry, which must be ordinary objects easy to overlook.
Following Herpo the Foul making the first ever Horcrux, his living body now only had half a soul, meaning if someone tried to take his life, he would not die, because to fully die, the entire soul needs to be destroyed. Over the years, there were other means of being immortal in the Wizarding world, such as consuming unicorn blood or drinking the elixir of life, which was found in the Philosopher's Stone. However, those are not nearly as reliable as a Horcrux. For the elixir and unicorn blood, you need to maintain consumption on a regular basis. For Horcruxes though, you complete one task and never run the risk of running out of whatever is keeping you alive. However, Horcruxes come with a catch. Creating Horcruxes goes against the first principle of the fundamental laws of magic, an idea devised by the wizard Adalbert Waffling. He said, "Tamper with the deepest mysteries, the source of life, the essence of self, only if prepared for the consequences of the most extreme and dangerous kind." What this means is that the further somebody goes into meddling in the deepest underlying laws of magic, the more drastic the consequences will be. Creating Horcruxes is probably the most egregious way of breaking this principle, and as such, it has perhaps the worst consequence of any other brand of magic: limbo. If you create a Horcrux that is destroyed and you die, you will forever be stuck in limbo, which is between life and death. There is interestingly no record of Herpo's death, but we can theorize several outcomes of his life. One is that he could still be living to this day, but in hiding, hence why we never learn of his presence during the 20th or 21st century. The second outcome could be that his body was killed, but the Horcrux remained, which would put him in a state that is less than spirit or ghost, but still alive. A state that made Horace Slughorn say that death would be preferable. This is of course the state that Voldemort was in following his attempted murder on Harry Potter. And the third option is that his Horcrux was destroyed and he died, meaning he was forever in limbo. If you look at these three options, it's clear that if you even think about making one of these Horcruxes, you are absolutely insane. For those that do choose to make it though, it might seem simple at first. However, it is not as simple as it sounds. Many dark wizards in history have tried to split and grab their soul as Herpo had done, but most fail. And if you fail, the result is death. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, compared it to splitting an atom. It's something that people imagined might be able to be done, but most people in history were unsuccessful, at least until 1932. And Rowling said that if you fail in trying to make a Horcrux, it leads to catastrophic effects. Over the years, people studied and researched what Herpo had created, which many consider to be by far the most terrible of all dark magic. Most stayed away from it, even those among the darkest wizards in the wizarding world. An author named Godelit wrote a book called Magic Most Evil, which went over the most vile forms of magic. However, even Godelit just barely skimmed over the subject of Horcruxes, stating them to be a subject so evil that it should never be spoken of. Wizards who actually did research and published books about Herpo's work were all as twisted as him, including one author that wrote a book called Secrets of the Darkest Art. The text explains that a Horcrux is the complete opposite of a human being. No matter what happens to the person's body, even if they're killed, their soul lives on untouched. For a Horcrux, however, it's the other way around. There, the fragment of soul depends upon its container. It can't survive without it. So if the container dies, so does the soul. When Albus Dumbledore became headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, he removed the book Secrets of the Darkest Arts from the school library. However, before he became headmaster, this book was discovered by a student named Tom Riddle, who would later be referred to as Lord Voldemort. This manuscript instructed Tom how to make a Horcrux going step by step. The information in this book changed Riddle's life forever and significantly altered his life path. He studied these dark objects and learned just about everything there was to know about them. The one thing he was looking for, though, was not mentioned anywhere. This made him come to the conclusion that he would be the first to attempt something insane, to make more than one Horcrux. He took this idea to his professor Horace Slughorn, hoping to get his opinion on whether or not this feat was possible, and he heard what he wanted to hear.
Can you only split the soul once? For instance, 7?
7?
Lord Voldemort would then pioneer a whole new realm of immortality. As said, to create a Horcrux, you must cast the spell that Herpo the Foul created while splitting your soul. However, just casting the spell was not the only thing you had to do. On top of the spell, you must commit a horrific act, an act so unspeakable that it has never been revealed. J.K. Rowling originally planned to reveal exactly how it was done in her book, The Encyclopedia of the Potter World. However, after her editor read about this process and felt like vomiting, she decided not to release the book at all. She was quoted saying, "Some things are better left unsaid." However, this wouldn't be a deep dive if I didn't explore every possibility of what this act could be. I'm going to give a warning here though. Some of the things I'm about to go over are quite disturbing. So if you have kids watching with you, which I know a lot of people watching my videos do, I would recommend skipping to the time on the screen right now. I'll start off by saying that the act is not cannibalism, which for some reason is one of the most widely believed theories online. Many said that to create a Horcrux, one would have to eat the person they killed. Some said that they would have to cut them open and drink the victim's blood, and others said that they would have to eat the victim's heart, which actually goes along with many ancient folklore stories of accomplishing immortality. However, while Rowling is known to take inspiration from ancient folklore, I found some major flaws in this theory. For one, the Riddle family was examined through an autopsy, which came back saying that there was no physical harm to them whatsoever. Then there's also Myrtle Warren, who was of course checked out by the school staff including Dumbledore, and nothing was wrong with her other than the fact that she was dead and had become a ghost. And on top of that, considering how publicized Hepzibah Smith's death was, I imagine it would have been reported if her body had been ripped apart in any way. So I think I've debunked this theory, especially with the Riddle family aspect. One possibility that I haven't seen many people bring up, but is something that came to me while researching this video, is necrophilia. If you don't know what necrophilia is, it's basically raping a dead corpse. This wouldn't damage the body the way eating it would, and if you go through the list of who Voldemort killed to make a Horcrux, Myrtle, his father, a Muggle tramp, Hepzibah, an Albanian peasant, and Bertha Jorkins, they were all people that were in a position to potentially be penetrated in some way. He might have needed a little help from Wormtail for that last one, which is a horrible thought, but considering that Bertha was tortured for hours before dying, she would probably be the easiest body to do this to. This theory gets even darker though, when you consider the fact that Voldemort was going to use the 1-year-old Harry to make a Horcrux the night he tried to kill him, which would then lead to, well, this is truly a sickening thought, but is what I think the most likely horrific act you have to commit to create a Horcrux. And if there was anything to make Rowling's editor feel like she was going to vomit, it would be this. To be honest, just recording this, I feel a little sick myself. There are some other theories out there that I'll mention though. One is having to drink a huge amount of your own blood as you commit the process. And going off of sacrificing your own self with blood, we could take this a step further and say that you must give up pieces of your own body, which would track seeing as Voldemort became less and less human as he went through the process of making himself immortal. There's another theory that the killing curse would have to be said in Parseltongue, which both Voldemort and Herpa were able to do. However, very few had this ability, and anyway, it wasn't always the killing curse that took the life of Voldemort's victims. And this brings up a detail that is rather important for Horcruxes. That is the way in which you must kill. Voldemort used the killing curse on 4 of the 6 successful murders, and also tried to do so on Harry as well. However, he killed Myrtle Warren and Hepzibah Smith using other means. The stare of the basilisk from the Chamber of Secrets was what killed Myrtle, meaning Voldemort didn't even do it himself. What we can infer though is that this worked because the basilisk was acting off of his orders. And as for Hepzibah, Voldemort didn't use any form of magic, he simply poisoned her. Another interesting theory is that the person making the Horcrux would have to kill somebody the victim loved, which would fit for a few of Voldemort's victims. He killed his father's parents or his grandparents, he killed Harry's parents right before he was going to use Harry's death to make a Horcrux, and he easily could have found loved ones of the Muggle tramp and the Albanian peasant. However, he did not kill anybody that Hepzibah loved, nor did he kill anyone that Myrtle or Bertha Jorkins loved, so that theory doesn't really hold up either. On top of that, there's another theory that the person making the Horcrux would have to torture their victim for a prolonged amount of time before taking their life. We know for a fact that Voldemort did this to Bertha Jorkins before killing her, and again, it's possible that he did this to most on the list, but Myrtle is the one loose end. As she told Harry in the Chamber of Secrets,
I just remember seeing a pair of great big yellow eyes. My whole body sort of seized up, and then I was floating away.
This makes it clear that she had not been tortured before being killed. And on top of that, we know that Voldemort did not torture baby Harry, seeing as the only spell he hit Harry with was the Killing Curse. We know this because had he used the Cruciatus Curse, it would have fired back at him thanks to Lily's protection. And interestingly, had that happened, Voldemort might have realized that the protection was there and thus would know not to fire the Killing Curse at him. And that would change the whole outcome of the series. In conclusion, I believe that necrophilia is the horrific act that needs to be carried out. Obviously though, we'll never know for sure. What we do know though, is that you have to be a truly sick person to go through the process of making a Horcrux. So far, we've gone over the creation process that Herpo the Foul had created, which involved a specific spell and a horrific act. However, there were Horcruxes made without these two acts being carried out. Quirinius Quirrell was an example of this, as he was confirmed to be a temporary Horcrux. He had a part of Voldemort's soul inside of him, but because it was the original soul and not a split version of it, neither the spell nor the horrific act needed to take place.
You see what I've become? Live of another. A mere parasite.
Harry Potter becoming a Horcrux was another example of a loophole. According to Dumbledore, Voldemort had damaged his soul so much that when the final piece was hit with the Killing Curse that bounced back, his soul was so fragile that it just fell apart. It was said by Hermione that Voldemort had pushed his soul to the limit. That is why the final piece of the soul split when hit, and desperate to survive, it latched onto Harry, the only living thing that it could find. This made Harry have a piece of Voldemort inside of him, but neither the spell nor the horrific act needed to be committed, making Harry another rare exception to this dark piece of magic. Looking at how fragile Voldemort's soul was, there's a fascinating idea on why that is. When Herpo created Horcruxes, he never intended for the soul to be split apart more than once. As the book Secrets of the Darkest Art stated, even making one Horcrux can make your soul very unstable. So Voldemort was mad to even think of splitting his soul more than once, much less 6 different times. And ultimately, though he didn't know it, he had actually made 7 Horcruxes, meaning his soul was in 8 different pieces.
I, who have gone further than anybody along the path that leads to immortality. You know my goal, to conquer death.
Making more than one Horcrux though, actually made him weaker. Had he made just one Horcrux, the Killing Curse that rebounded might not have made the original part of his soul fall apart the way it did. Splitting his soul into so many pieces made the soul in his original body, as Dumbledore said, fragile. The first time Voldemort split his soul, the way Herpo intended for it to work, his soul was split 50-50, half going into the diary and half remaining in his original body. When he went on to create the Ring Horcrux though, that 50% left in his original body was once again split in half, meaning 25% went into the ring and 25% remained in his true form. He then made Hufflepuff's Cup a Horcrux, meaning that he split the 25% that remained in half again, leading to 12.5% going into the cup and 12.5% remaining in his original body. And he split his soul 2 more times before he went to kill Harry, at which point his original soul had just 3.1% left remaining. Because just 3.1% remained in his original soul, it makes sense that the soul in his original body would be fragile enough to fall apart when the Killing Curse hit him. And when this happened, it meant that his soul split apart again, half going into Harry and half being the only remaining part of his original soul, meaning that both Harry and Voldemort had just 1.5% of Voldemort in them. If this is the case, it's a major flaw in Voldemort's plan of becoming immortal. In the end, he had more of his soul in the diary, the ring, the cup, the locket, and the diadem than he did in his original form. And what was left of Voldemort became even smaller when he made his final Horcrux in Nagini. When the 1.5% was split in half again, all that remained was just 0.7% of his original soul, meaning that Harry actually had more of Voldemort's soul in him than Voldemort himself did. When Voldemort finally did die, he was sent into Limbo, which as I said earlier is the state between life and death. However, this punishment was even worse for Voldemort because he would not appear in his full or almost full body the way I think others would have. If what we went over is correct, because just 0.7% of him remained, all that appeared in Limbo was a tiny piece of a broken and mangled soul that had been split apart so many times, there was barely anything left. As we've established, each Horcrux is its own self, its own part of Voldemort. With that being said, each one is also a different age. How it works is that whenever Voldemort makes a Horcrux, the age in which he made it is how old the piece of the soul in the Horcrux is. This is why the Diary Horcrux was a teenage Tom Riddle. And age was not the only thing affected by this. It also affected his mind and memory. This teenage Tom Riddle knew nothing past his days at Hogwarts. Thus, he did not know the tyrant he would later become, nor did he know about his downfall at the hand of Harry Potter. He was only aware of this in the Chamber of Secrets book because Ginny had told him when writing in the diary. And the same goes for the Ring Horcrux, which was also made when Voldemort was a teenager. That piece of soul doesn't remember past his school days either. As for the locket and the cup, these were made before he disappeared for a decade, meaning those pieces of Voldemort would only know up until his career at Borgin and Burke's and stealing the two objects from Hepzibah Smith. They too would not know about the conquest he had over the Wizarding World. And as for Ravenclaw's diadem, that piece of Voldemort would only know about his decade-long disappearance and being denied the Defense Against the Dark Arts job by Dumbledore. The only Horcrux that would know about the tyrant he became, as well as his fall in Godric's Hollow, was the piece of his soul in Nagini. Each of the souls were capable of thinking for themselves and were living beings that even had a heartbeat. The trio could literally feel the heartbeat inside of the locket during the Deathly Hallows.
I know. I felt that too. It ticking or something. Like it's got a heart.
Like it's alive.
Then when they opened it, its eyes became visible, meaning it could see.
Behind both of the glass windows within blinked a living eye, dark and handsome as Tom Riddle's eyes had been.
The souls inside the Horcruxes have specific powers as well, including being able to flit in and out of someone if the person becomes too emotionally connected or dependent on the piece of the soul inside the object. This is what happened to Ginny Weasley, who poured her emotions, frustrations, and fears into the Diary Horcrux. This allowed this piece of soul to possess Ginny without her knowing, having full control over a different body. This means that a Horcrux can almost mimic the unforgivable curse Imperio, which allows a witch or wizard to have full control over another being. However, though the piece of soul can act out of someone else's body, this is not a permanent solution. It can only take this so far before they lose control of the person they're possessing. One of the biggest questions for the Diary Horcrux is, what if it had succeeded in getting a new body? As stated, each Horcrux could think for itself and had magical powers, including being able to use a wand. So clearly, if this had happened, then there would have been two Voldemorts in this world. One from the diary, and one that was currently hiding in the Albanian forest without a body. This would be a very interesting scenario, and is something that would make you question if a Horcrux can actually backfire on you. The two Voldemorts might have actually had to go head to head, fighting to be the one remaining. This scenario would also very interestingly mimic the use of a time turner, as there were two different versions of the same person, much like we saw there be two different versions of Harry and Hermione. This scenario would actually be reversed though, because instead of the second version being from the future, the second version is actually from the past. Unlike with the Time Turner 2, you won't face the repercussions or risks of changing time through your actions, meaning you could actually face and potentially kill the future you. Now, assuming that the original Voldemort got his body back before the Diary Voldemort found him, though the Diary Riddle was younger and more agile, the future him would have far more experience and magical skill, plus he would have the other Horcruxes that would still tether him to Earth should the Diary try to kill him. And now, you can't talk about the destruction of souls without bringing up the ancient soul suckers themselves, Dementors. Bringing them into the equation makes this even more fascinating. It poses the question, what happens if someone with a Horcrux gets the Dementor's kiss? Can a Horcrux live on without the original soul? In this situation, the Dementor would eat the main soul, meaning the Horcrux no longer has anything to do because the soul they were tethering to Earth is now gone. With this question being posed, it also makes us ask, if the Tom Riddle from the diary killed the real Voldemort, would he be able to live without its host? One answer is no. The Horcrux would simply die without the main soul. However, I find it more likely that the Horcrux would be able to live without its original host. We've already recognized how independent each Horcrux is, basically having the potential to be another human in the right circumstance. It thinks for itself, it has a heartbeat, it has eyes, and it has magical abilities of their own. So looking at those things, I think it would be able to survive. Getting back to the actual plot of the books though, the real Voldemort was fortunate that the diary riddle was thwarted. And funnily enough, it was thwarted by the exact same boy that had taken him down, Harry Potter. Although the piece of the soul in the diary knew the fate of his original self thanks to Ginny, he still fell under the same trap that he did in the future. He underestimated a young boy and overestimated his power. When the true Voldemort was resurrected, he was actually angry at Lucius for being so careless with the diary Horcrux. Lucius had been told that the diary had the power to reopen the Chamber of Secrets, but he did not know its true nature. Thinking that the Dark Lord was gone forever, Malfoy decided to have some fun planting the book in the school. When Voldemort returned, however, he was furious with Malfoy for doing this, and though we originally thought he was mad because he was now down a Horcrux, his anger could have been for another reason. It could have been because he knew how close they were to having a second Voldemort that would have threatened him. This would actually make sense because he never intended for that Horcrux to keep him alive. He always meant for it to be a disposable weapon.
What intrigued and alarmed me most was that that diary had been intended as a weapon as much as a safeguard. If he intended the diary to be passed to or planted on some future Hogwarts student, he was being remarkably blasé about that precious fragment of his soul concealed within it.
Emotions. It is one of the things that Horcruxes use as their main source of power. The diary used Ginny's emotions to almost succeed in reincarnating itself, and the locket used emotion to affect the mental state of Harry, Ron, and Hermione when they were in its direct vicinity.
Was it his own blood pulsing through his veins that he could feel? Or was it something beating inside the locket, like a tiny metal heart?
The Locket Horcrux brought out the worst in the trio by rapidly making them angrier and moodier, more prone to fighting, and made darker aspects of themselves begin to appear. The more time it had to mess with the trio's heads, the easier it was to corrupt them, and it possibly even created illusions to make them turn on each other. The Horcrux was able to get into their heads so much that it made them incapable of producing a Patronus charm. One thing to note though, is that the Horcrux can help someone when toying with their emotions as well, but only to those who have malicious intent. When asked how Umbridge was able to conjure a Patronus while wearing the locket when the trio was not, Rowling explained this, saying she has an affinity for this horrible object, which would help rather than hinder her. Now, I'm going to give an explanation of why the Locket Horcrux failed to get its own body while the Diary Horcrux was so close to doing so. I think this is because Harry, Ron, and Hermione actively fought the influence of the Locket, while Ginny fully embraced the Diary. Had the trio embraced the Locket the way Ginny had the Diary, it might have been able to make a strong enough connection to flit in and out of them and potentially use their life force to get a body of its own. There's also a theory that I feel I have to go over because I want to explore every aspect of Horcruxes in this deep dive. The theory states that the reason why the Dursleys were so awful, angry, and spiteful was because of the Horcrux inside of Harry. Because they were around him so much, they, like the trio with the Locket, were affected by the piece of Voldemort's soul in him. However, I don't really think that this theory holds up. We saw that Petunia and Vernon were already this way before Harry was left on their doorstep.
I've watched them all day. They're the worst sort of muggles imaginable.
Also, by the logic of this theory, Ron and Hermione would almost certainly have gotten the same effects during their time at Hogwarts, but they never did. While researching, I came up with an interesting thought. The diary might have had an advantage that the other objects did not. As we just went over, every Horcrux has the ability to take over a body under the right circumstances. However, I think that the diary has another power. A power that makes it a close imitation to the magical object known as a pensieve, the basin in which you can place your memories and relive them. The Diary Horcrux was able to do the same thing, even bringing Harry into his memory. However, there's one small difference between the two objects. J.K. Rowling said that the memories put into a pensieve are not altered by how the person thought they experienced the event. A pensieve memory is exactly how it happened. It's reality. It's important that I've got that across, because Slughorn gave Dumbledore this pathetic cut and paste memory. He didn't want to give the real thing, and very obviously patched it up and cobbled it together. So what you remember is accurate in the pensieve. Otherwise, it really would just be like a diary, wouldn't it? Confined to what you remember. The use of the word diary in this quote is noteworthy. It shows that in her head, Rowling clearly compares a pensieve to the diary that she wrote about in the Chamber of Secrets.
A memory, preserved in a diary for 50 years.
Looking at the rest of the quote, Rowling said that unlike a pensieve, memories in a diary can be altered based on how the writer saw them. They're not based on what really happened. This ability to show people memories, which the other Horcruxes could not do, gives the Diary Horcrux another weapon to harness every Horcrux's #1 power, that being influencing emotions. The Diary tried to influence Harry's emotions by sucking him into the memory of how he caught Hagrid. Obviously, this didn't work the way he had hoped though.
Hagrid's my friend. And you framed him, didn't you?
Earlier, I went over how there are two examples of living beings becoming Horcruxes, that of course being Nagini and Harry. The piece of Voldemort in both Harry and Nagini connected them to the Dark Lord in many ways. It gave Harry powers like speaking Parseltongue, which was actually referenced in the prophecy about them. He shall have power the Dark Lord knows not. Then, when it came to Nagini, she was able to telepathically send messages to Voldemort, which we saw when she called him to Godric's Hollow when she had Harry in Bathilda's home. Voldemort was also able to see what she saw, like when she attacked Mr. Weasley. Little did Voldemort know, while he was seeing through Nagini, Harry was seeing through him, and thus was also seeing into Nagini, meaning that all three living beings that possessed a piece of Voldemort's soul saw the exact same thing. Voldemort was not at first aware of his connection to Harry until that very moment. Before that, Harry could sense if Voldemort was near by the pain in his scar, and later as Voldemort got stronger, he felt his scar hurt when the Dark Lord was feeling intense emotions. When Voldemort discovered this connection, he did not know that it was because there was a Horcrux inside of Harry. He actually never learned this even to his dying breath. He did use this connection to his advantage though, planting fake memories into Harry's mind. Voldemort eventually closed his connection with Harry using occlumency, and this was following him possessing Harry's body in the Ministry of Magic. Doing so had caused him immense pain because of the love inside Harry's heart, which was too much for Voldemort. And this is a very interesting scenario that isn't really ever addressed. Voldemort possessing Harry's body meant that both the real Voldemort as well as the Horcrux that was in Harry were in the same body for a moment. Possession in the Wizarding world is described as this. Possession was a type of dark magic which involved a person's soul inhabiting or taking control of another person's mind and body. So the fact that it is the soul that takes over, Voldemort taking over Harry is basically the same thing he did to Quirrell, meaning Harry might have been a temporary Horcrux for the few moments Voldemort's soul was inside of him. Voldemort would have then left this temporary vessel the way he left Quirrell's body when he was a temporary Horcrux. This goes even deeper though, because Harry was already a Horcrux, meaning at this moment, he had two different pieces of Voldemort's soul inside of him at the same time. Just theorizing, Dumbledore specifically said that Voldemort being in Harry hurt him because of the love inside of Harry. Could it be possible though, that the reason he couldn't bear it was because he felt a part of his own soul in there with him? I always thought it was a stretch that merely feeling the good in Harry would be enough to cause Voldemort that much pain. It would make sense that there was an added factor that would make that come to fruition.
Come, Nagini. I need to keep you safe.
Nagini was the only being that Voldemort ever truly cared about. He did not have friends, nor did he have any affection for anyone. His heart was cold and free of any positive emotions toward any sort of being. Nagini was different though, and I think the reason for this is because he knew that part of himself lived in her. He cared not for the snake herself, but for his own soul. This then brings up a fascinating thought. Had Voldemort known that part of himself lived in Harry as well, would he have treated him differently too, as he did with Nagini? I would guess no, considering he was a threat according to the prophecy, but it would be interesting to see how he would have gone about his plan if he knew Harry was a Horcrux. And there's another question we could ask about both Harry and Nagini. Both of them had a piece of Voldemort's soul in them, meaning they were just like Voldemort. So knowing that, because they're living beings, would they have lived forever just as Voldemort would have? There were of course other Horcruxes besides them, so had the locket, the ring, the cup, the diary, and the diadem not been destroyed, would those Horcruxes have tethered them to Earth like they would have for the original soul? Would they too be immortal? Personally, I don't think they would. Though each of the 7 Horcruxes is from the same soul, I don't think they are directly linked to one another. They were all split in half from Voldemort's original soul at different times, meaning each one is its own original creation. Though they all share a thread to the real Voldemort, they do not share a thread with each other. By this logic, it means that the other Horcruxes would indeed not make Harry and Nagini immortal. The idea that all of the Horcruxes are separate is proven even more, because though the soul inside Harry and Nagini both have a connection to Voldemort, they do not have a connection between the two of them. The only reason Harry saw through Nagini's eyes was because Voldemort was doing so at the time. And going off of that, we have even more proof that all of the Horcruxes are not connected to one another. As we went over, whenever Harry was close to Voldemort, his scar would burn. However, when he came face to face with the Diary Horcrux, Harry's scar never burned, nor did it burn when he came face to face with Nagini in Bathilda's house. So in conclusion, none of the Horcruxes can feel each other, but this was kind of ruined by the movie. They showed Voldemort and Harry feeling the cup and the diadem Horcruxes being destroyed, but that was not the case in the book. Dumbledore said that Voldemort had split his soul so many times that he didn't even feel when one was destroyed. It is possible that those that made just one Horcrux could feel their Horcrux being destroyed though. And while we're talking about connections, Horcruxes can sense connections with other things, including things that they know are dangerous to them. The night Harry jumped into the water to get the Sword of Gryffindor, the locket sensed danger, knowing that the sword could destroy it, and it began to pull away. It choked Harry and did everything it could to ensure that he did not get to the object that could take it down. Horcruxes can also make connections with victims, once again to defend itself. When the locket burst open and that little eye came out to see who was coming after it, it looked into Ron's head, the person the piece of the soul knew held the deadly sword, and brought forth all of his biggest fears and insecurities.
I have seen your dreams, Ronald Weasley, and I have seen your fears.
As said earlier, making a Horcrux is probably the most reliable way of accomplishing immortality, but they do have weaknesses. To destroy a Horcrux, you must do so with something so destructive that the object in which it resides, as well as the soul inside, is hurt beyond magical repair. The two main things that can destroy a Horcrux is Basilisk Venom and Fiend Fire. It's funny that Basilisk Venom has this ability, considering that the person who learned to breed the beast also created Horcruxes. Herpo the Foul's first discovery is one of the only things that can destroy his second discovery. Fiend Fire is a deadly curse that produces not just normal fire, but enchanted flames of immense size and heat, and which take the form of giant beasts like serpents or dragons. It can destroy pretty much anything in its path, and it's incredibly hard to control. It single-handedly destroyed Voldemort's Diadem Horcrux during the Battle of Hogwarts, although in the movie, Harry stabbed it with a Basilisk Fang and then they kicked it into the Fiend Fire. But in the book, that didn't happen. It was the Fiend Fire alone that made it shake and then fall apart. While shaking and falling apart is the Horcrux's reaction to Fiend Fire, its reaction to Basilisk Venom is a blood-curdling scream as it dies, which both the diary and the locket did upon being stabbed. This is chilling, seeing as the Horcrux is essentially its own person, so the screaming is basically the sound of someone dying.
He thought he heard the faintest, most distant scream of pain, echoing not from the grounds or the castle, but from the thing that had just fragmented in his fingers.
Earlier, I talked about two Horcruxes that were anomalies, both not following the normal rules of how a Horcrux is made. As we said, Harry was made a Horcrux because Voldemort's soul was so fragile that it fell apart and grabbed onto him. Meanwhile, Quirrell was made a temporary Horcrux when Voldemort morphed himself into his body. Seeing as these have unconventional ways of being made, it's only right that they have unconventional ways of being destroyed. The Horcrux in Harry was destroyed by the Killing Curse, Voldemort unknowingly obliterating the Horcrux he never meant to make. It is possible that the Killing Curse could kill other Horcruxes as well, but considering that the book Secrets of the Darkest Art did not list that as a possibility next to Fiendfire and Basilisk Venom, I find it unlikely that that is a normal way of destroying a Horcrux. As for the other unconventional Horcrux, the Horcrux in Quirrell was an odd one. Quirrell himself was killed by a love protection, the love protection that Lily put on Harry. This means that this piece of magic did destroy a Horcrux. However, because it was a temporary Horcrux, I see it this way. Voldemort used the Vessel of Quirrell as long as he could, and because it was temporary, he was able to leave before the vessel expired. So I guess technically a love protection can destroy a temporary Horcrux, but maybe not a normal one. But the odds of this scenario happening again are slim to none, so we'll never have anything to compare it to see if it really is viable. Now, there is a common question asked online that has to do with Harry being stuck with Basilisk Venom. People say that the Horcrux in Harry should have been destroyed when the Beast's tooth punctured his arm. The consensus of people online take this as a fact and see this as a glaring plot hole, but apparently people don't read. This is explained directly in the 7 books. It's not even extended lore or something Rowling released after the series ended. As I just said a minute ago, to destroy a Horcrux, it has to be beyond magical repair. Harry was literally healed or repaired by the magic of Phoenix Tears, so he was not beyond magical repair. Magic repaired him, and thus the Horcrux in him was not destroyed. One of the most baffling things about Horcruxes is that there is a way to undo it. There is a way to take the split soul out of the object in which you put it in and reattach it to the original soul. This process is difficult though, especially considering the type of people who would make a Horcrux to begin with. What you must do to put it back together is really feel remorse for the murder you committed to make it. This means that you need to genuinely feel that the murder you committed was wrong, which seems nearly impossible considering that the criteria for the murder committed had to be done without regret or remorse. And even if you do succeed in feeling regret and remorse, putting it back together leads to pain that can destroy you. Horcruxes are an extremely difficult piece of magic, and most who make them think they are unstoppable. But during this deep dive, I think we've seen that there are actually a lot of flaws when it comes to splitting your soul. When you do it, your life basically comes down to 4 fates. 1, you succeed and live forever. 2, you succeed but are eventually killed, leading to a bodiless form that is worse than death. 3, one of your Horcruxes finds its own body and challenges you. And 4, you or someone else destroys your Horcrux, you die, and you live in limbo for the rest of time. Either way, making a Horcrux is condemning yourself to a life that most would not want to live.